share with you the very simple advice that changed my life forever. If you are trying to accumulate wealth, become a millionaire, you probably went down this thought pattern that I gotta go to school, I gotta get an education to get a high six-figure paying job, or heck, I gotta be a genius like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and start a multi-billion-dollar business. But this isn't factually how wealth building truly works. Actually, I'm only 28 years old and I've been able to accumulate a couple $100,000 in wealth, making less than $40,000 a year. You could work a minimum wage job and actually become a millionaire. And it's by understanding this one very simple fundamental rule, and that is knowing what an asset versus a liability is. It's very fundamentally true that if you just own more things that go up in value over time than things that you own that go down in value over time, you're inevitably going to become rich at some point or another. Now, I'm going to break this down very in-depthly, but in the clarity of my transparency, I'd really appreciate if you slap that like button, because I'm going to go well beyond the Robert Kiyosaki of assets versus liabilities. So ladies, gentlemen, let's jump right into this. Welcome back. Passive income investors are liking to kick this off. Let's ask Google what an asset and a liability is, in which Google describes an asset as a useful or valuable thing, person, or quality, which is where we start going down this thought path that, yeah, if we acquire the right amount of knowledge, we become an asset to a company. And the more valuable the knowledge set is, the more a company is likely to pay you. So an invaluable thing we could obviously say is something like a real estate, but I'm going to explain to you in this video why a real estate can be a liability sometimes over an asset. Sometimes we think cash can be an asset, but I'm also going to prove to you in this video why cash is a terrible asset amongst many other things. But let's just see what they think a liability is here, because these definitions are very broad. But it says a liability is something a person or a company owes, usually a sum of money. But a liability goes so far beyond just the monetary aspect of things, because if you just cross the street, you're in liability of getting hit by oncoming traffic or drunk driver. I mean, there's always liabilities. Then I'm going to try and narrow this down, because obviously the spectrum is very large. And I want to kick this off by talking about the most controversial of all of the different assets versus liabilities out there, and that is actually using a credit card correctly. Now, if you watch Dave Ramsey, he's going to ream anybody out, because if you don't have the psychological or the emotional stability to understand how to use a credit card correctly, yeah, this is going to be a big hindrance to you. But no, credit cards and banks aren't the devil. They're not out here to screw you. They're out here to offer you very useful tools that, if you use correctly, can be incredible ways of building wealth. In which I have two credit cards, and one that I'm using to run all of my business expenses, because it is a cash-back credit card in which I have never made one interest payment, and every year this cashback credit card usually pays me a couple $100, which is more than it has ever cost me. But on the other spectrum of things, I've been using a line of credit to leverage it into some real estate investment trust, in which I leveraged out $5,000, in which the rate of return and cash flow that I get is well above the interest payments. So long as that keeps working out the way it's working out, this line of credit has become more of an asset than a liability, as it puts money in my pocket. I just wanted to throw this out here because credit cards are so controversial. But let's talk about your education, because leveraging yourself as an asset is something we all have to do throughout our lives to some varying degree. So building up a knowledge base and paying for that knowledge sometimes can be very lucrative. But in other circumstances, and I argue this by sending a 17-year-old to pick out their entire life career and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing so, might be a fairly crucial mistake. And just to show you some simple fundamental rules here, let's presume that your career over 5 years of an education is going to cost you $80,000 here, folks. You're going to have to come up with an $80,000 student loan or whatever you're going to get to pay this off, because you, like me, likely didn't have $80,000 lying around when you were 17 or 18, and you probably didn't have wealthy parents. Some way or another, you're going to have to pay this back. So let's presume over a 10-year period, you're going to be in school for 5 years, you're going to get a job once you get out of school, and you're going to spend the next 5 years paying that back. So you're going to wipe out 10 years of wealth building capability, in which if you got a market average return, which is what the stock market offers, which is around 10%, you are actually giving up on roughly $207,000 over that 10-year period before you even get to start building wealth here, folks. Now, let's presume you can get my rate of return, which is around 18%. We're talking about roughly $418,000 that you are potentially missing out on, which is getting pretty close, if I'm being honest, to retirement money. Let's talk talk about something that's way more confusing and contradictive here, because to a lot of people, saving money is the definition of building assets. But money, in my humble opinion, is a completely worthless asset, which I'm going to explain. Let's presume you had $1 million in pennies almost about 20 years ago. Did you know today that $1 million in pennies is almost worth $2 million? Well, why is that? Because they used to use copper to make pennies, in which the value of copper has gone up more over time than the actual currency value of that penny. This has been a big problem in monetary policy. As you might recall, they used to make quarters that actually had bits of silver in it until that silver became worth more than the actual currency itself. But now we live in a period, folks, where currency purely goes down in value thanks to inflation. And the way inflation simply works, and I said this many of times, that for every $20 bill, let's use this as an example, if this is the only $20 bill that exists, it's going to be pretty valuable, right? But let's say they print another $20 bill. Well, that degrades the full value of the first one because now we have another one. And every time we print more and more bills, it constantly devalues the ones next to them, in which we can actually compare currencies. And what I'm showing you here is the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar over time, in which the Canadian currency has actually dropped in value by about 25% against the US. So let's presume you had $100,000 in the bank a decade ago. Skip to today, that $100,000 is now worth $25,000 less, even though it still says you have $100,000 in your bank. And this is one of the hardest realities for people to comprehend when building wealth, because obviously you don't want to hold cash. Cash is a terrible wealth builder. Unless you're buying those currencies that have copper or silver in them, but trust me, that's not going to exist. It's become more of a rarity. And a lot of people want to go down the path of, well, then why don't I buy silver? Why don't I buy gold? And the problem is though this seems like an asset, it is a liability. Well, it lies around here because it has the risk of getting robbed. You have to protect it. And at some point you're going to have to liquidate it, which can also be a liability depending on who you're selling it to and at what price, of course. So simply, what assets out there can we own then that are going to go up more over time than they're going to devalue if I can't hold cash? Well, this is very simple, folks. We're talking about real estate, which is responsible for making more millionaires than any other investment class that currently exists out there. And I know this is an expensive asset class, but it can also be a major liability. I'm a huge advocate toward buying duplexes, triplexes, multiplex, multifamily plexes, anything that can cash flow income. Heck, if you even want to go buy yourself a house, buy yourself a duplex, rent the other half out, because you're going to get major tax benefits, and they're going to pretty much help you cover your entire mortgage, folks, because now you hold more assets that actually go up in value over time, in which it's actually putting money in your pocket and helping you pay the bills. But going out and just buying a house to live in will eventually become more of a liability than an asset, because you will have to accumulate property taxes. You're going to have to accumulate repairs, toilets, plumbing. All of that stuff will come into play because you think, well, I own this house and it's going up 5% year over year. But meanwhile, you're spending that 5% in property taxes, repairs, anything you're doing to keep that house even habitable could hinder your entire rate of return. And that is some of the biggest things people underlook when they're buying real estate. Now, on the other spectrum, like that credit card, folks, we could talk about buying stocks, because I leverage that line of credit from the bank into the markets, which is something I'm comfortable doing. But again, I don't recommend here, folks. But even buying stocks, if you do not know what you're doing, could be more of a liability than an asset, because if you're buying companies that aren't able to build wealth or continue to grow cash flow, there's a good chance that stock's not going to perform well for you. And you also have to have the knowledge to know if a company goes through bad times, like right now when we're in a pandemic, and you watch your stock drop 30 or 40%, are you going to have the foresight to fully understand why that company is losing money, and if they're likely to get that money back or even continue to grow cash flow sometime in the future, which means you're going to be comfortable holding on to that stock in the long term. Because if you can't recognize that company's never going to build up its cash flows again, it's eventually going to become worthless and lose money, well, you're going to end up finding yourself in a pretty big liability-based situation. But you could also just buy ETFs, exchange traded funds, let other people manage your money. But then you want to make sure you're picking the right wealth managers, because obviously that comes with its own liabilities. Now, you're starting to realize that this doesn't sound easy. You're like, oh my God, all this stuff this guy's talking about, I never understood currency went down. I didn't know any of this stuff, man. Well, this is the game that you're going to have to learn to play. Let me simplify this for you a little bit more here. We're taking a look at jets and cars. You probably look at multi-millionaires flying around in their jets and their very fancy sports cars thinking, oh, well, that's what it takes to be rich. But really, it's not. Typically, when you see a very wealthy person flying around in a jet, it's because they have meetings, they have deals, they got things to look at, and it's quicker for them to fast track their way to where they need to go. That time saver for them versus getting on a commercial flight and having to go through like baggage and all that luggage stuff and checkout and security, it slows them down for getting deals done that likely makes them more money, meaning a jet could actually be an asset to them. And that's why you probably look at rich people that have jets thinking to yourself, oh, they're so fancy, they have so much money. But really, to them, it's just a logical solution to making more money. Typically, let's use somebody like Jeff Bezos, for example. Why would he fly around on a regular plane when that guy is banging out hundreds of billions of dollars for shareholders, building one of the largest companies in the world? You want him to get to the meetings he has to get to and get back so he can keep working his ass off on building assets for shareholders. It just makes common sense. So even a car, though I think cars are major liabilities and you really want to know what you're doing when you're buying a car, in my set of circumstances, I needed a car to get to my job. I wasn't just joyriding around in it, so it made sense to have it as an asset because it would produce more income than it would cost. This has been a very broad overview, but let's take a step back and understand that there's the yin and yang to life. Everything I talked about could literally be an asset or a liability, because cash, even though it goes down in value, could still be an asset. Because let's say you don't have enough cash and this really good deal comes up where you know you could double your money in less than a year, but you don't have any money to make the deal. Well, now all of a sudden cash became a liability because you just don't have any of it. Like, there's so many different ways to look at this, because you'll simply change the way you look at everything in your entire life. From when you're buying food at a restaurant, you'll see how much it's costing you, realizing I could put this in an asset that'll go up. Heck, let's use Apple as an example. I mean, a lot of people are like, iPhones, like this laptop, all of this equipment is so expensive. I made like an $8,000 investment in Apple that has accumulated into something like $25,000 or $30,000 that I've been taking profits on all the way throughout these years, in which I've made 5 times more than any of the Apple products that I have ever bought. But the problem is you have to step back and kind of become a minimalist. You can't have everything right now, you whiny baby. There's so many people out there that want their suckers right now. They want their cake and they want to eat it too. This is not a fast game, folks. You have to let these things curate over time. So if you want a nice brand new Corvette, there's nothing wrong with that. But when you look at it, is that Corvette's going to cost you $80,000 and that's all you have in the bank? That is very stupid. Whereas millionaires think to themselves, well, how many pieces of real estate do I have to buy to get enough cash flow coming in to afford the payments of the Corvette, so I'm no longer having to pay with it with my own money? Those assets that I own are still going up in value, and not only that, they cash flow, which is covering the expense of my Corvette. Now that thought pattern will change your life forever. And in light of that, I would love to know what you guys think in that comment section below about this just really broad overview of literally the definition of things that changed my life. I'd really appreciate your input if you're new to this or if you're experienced some other things that I may have missed. But stay cool, stay awesome, and I look forward to chatting to you tomorrow.